Hello, everyone. I'm George Wimberly, Director of Professional Development at the American Educational Research Association, AERA. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's workshop, Mentorship and Collaboration in Quantitative Research, the NSF Quantitative Research Methods Scholars Program. This workshop is part of the AERA and Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, ICPSR. It is our partnership for expanding education research in STEM, or what we call peers, data hub that is funded by the National Science Foundation. The Peers Hub is a web-based platform. We think of it as a convening place that enables discovery through wide-ranging forms of education and STEM-related data. It connects researchers to networks for collaboration and communication, and it promotes capacity building in research methods, data use, and responsible conduct in diverse forms of data. I encourage you to visit the Peers Data Hub platform and become part of the Hub community. This workshop is part of a series in collaboration with the Institutes and Research Methods, which like the Peers Hub, is part of NSF's Building Capacity for STEM Education Research, or the BURSR program. In this method series, the AERA ICPSR Peers Hub features the 11 institutes that seek to promote research expertise in applications of computational, quantitative, qualitative, and evaluative research methods useful to STEM education researchers and broaden the STEM professional workforce. This is our third workshop in this series, and additional workshops will follow about once a month throughout this year. We're going to take a break in the month of April, as we will have the AERA annual meeting that will be administered virtually, and there will be sessions that focus on this series as well as other professional development and training sessions. So I did send to you all a message today with some tips about things to highlight for today's workshop. First, we have American Sign Language interpreters and closed captioning services that are provided for this workshop. I want to thank our ASL interpreters and our closed captioners for providing their services today. Also, in the email message I sent to you all this morning, there is a link to the PowerPoint presentation slides for today's course, and we will also put this link into the chat so that you will have access to the presentation. Now, one of the things is there are over 1,300 or so people registered for today's workshop, and they're from institutions all around the world here. We really want to welcome you to being here today. But because there's such a large group of people, there's just some technical tips here to really help you. First of all, we are going to be using the Q&A box, question and answer box, for general questions to the instructors at designated times. Although the chat feature, you can connect with the panelists, I ask that you please limit any comments in the chat box, so as we're not so necessarily overwhelmed by the chat here, and also to kind of, in a sense, refrain from idle chit-chat in the chat box. Following the workshop, though, today at 3 p.m. Eastern, we'll wrap up the central portion of this workshop. But our instructors have agreed to be available for an informal discussion and question-answer period. In a sense, what this is like, we were in person at the AERA annual meeting. We had this workshop and in person, and then we'd all sort of have small groups, would go off to a coffee shop for a very informal kind of conversation. What I will do is, and we'll put into the chat, and also probably have a slide about this, is a link to this post-meet workshop discussion. And that will start about 3 p.m. Eastern. Keep in mind that this workshop is being recorded, and this recording will be available. Give us a few weeks, because we'll do some editing to the recording, and this will be available on the Peers Data Hub. Okay, again, we are pleased to offer this workshop. I want to thank our faculty for today's workshop: Professor Laura Stapleton, Professor Gregory Hancock, and Professor Kimberly Griffin, all from the University of Maryland, College Park, along with their colleagues and others who are part of their institute. Thank them for giving their time and their service, for sharing their expertise with us through this workshop series. The faculty here are all experts in quantitative research and are major contributors to the education research field through their teaching, through their scholarship, research, and service. We are grateful that they are able to share their knowledge with us today and talk about their program. You can find Vitas for the faculty online, and that way, if you want to learn more about their background. And I will say one other thing is we talk about mentoring and collaboration or team science as part of today's workshop. Professional mentoring, professional socialization are key aims of the AERA Professional Development and Training Program. Through our courses, through our fellowships, and other funding mechanisms for research, there are always key elements of mentoring and training. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Laura Stapleton, who will begin the course.
Great. Thank you so much, George. And thank AERA for giving us the opportunity to talk with everyone today. My colleague, Greg Hancock, who should show his face shortly, will be sharing the screen initially here. And Greg, if you could go forward to the next slide. We're joined today, there will be 3 of us presenting today, although there's a host of other team players that run this workshop, or excuse me, that run our institute. And if you could go, thank you, Greg. He needs some training. But so the 3 of us today are, me, Laura Stapleton. I am a professor and associate dean for research at the University of Maryland. And my background is I had about 10 years sort of professional experience in the federal government and in nonprofits. I was an economist and analyst, and then moved over into academe. And I've been teaching quantitative methods for about 20 years in departments of psychology and educational psychology. And Greg Hancock will be talking. And Greg is a former chemistry teacher who got bitten by the academic bug and has been teaching at higher education institutions for the past 30 years, an award-winning teacher. And he has been the program director of the Measurement, Statistics, and Evaluation Program, formerly department, for nearly 15 years. And then Kimberly Griffin will be joining us talking about mentoring. She's part of our team and is associate dean for graduate education and faculty affairs, and is a renowned scholar in diversity and equity in graduate education and the professoriate. She's also currently the editor for the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education. So today, the prior institutes have talked about particular methods, quantitative methods of interest. And we decided for our institute discussion, our webinar, is because our institute involves matching our scholars with the quantitative methods that they need. There's not a single quantitative method that we're teaching, or only a couple. We're trying to match whatever our participants need, that we can't really talk about a given quantitative method today. But what we are going to talk about is the importance of team science. And then we're going to give you an overview of what our program is all about. And then for those of you who are interested in cross-disciplinary collaborations or this team science, kind of strategies to make those effective. And then Kimberly is going to talk about mentorship styles, and as mentors, and that's what I am as part of this program, and as mentees, the participants in this program, what we should look out for to make the most of those relationships. And finally, we're going to sum it up. We're going to have 3 of our current scholars talk a little bit about their experiences so far in the program, as well as just generally in team science and in the mentoring relationships. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn this over to Greg Hancock, and he'll be talking about the importance of team science. Greg?
Are you going to mock my audiovisual skills while I do it?
I am not, but I was very sad because I couldn't see you that whole time. But I think you're off the screen.
Am I currently shown?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. It's nice to not see you. I wish it's such a weird medium. I'm supposed to be talking with you about the importance of team science, which is kind of a weird thing to do in the sense that we all kind of understand that team science is an important thing. I don't think you came here to be convinced of the importance of team science, but rather to learn a bit more about perspectives on team science and see how it might be done, one particular way that we're doing it. Let me pull back, though, a little bit. As Laura said, I've been a faculty member for 30 years and a quantitative methodologist during that time. And that means I've had an opportunity to be a part of a lot of teams. And so some of the things that I'm going to share draw on that. But first, I want to back up just a little bit. It's going to seem a little bit strange, but I want to tell you sort of how I come to this whole team thing. And for me, it's kind of an odd way. I was born and raised in Seattle by a single dad, which was kind of unusual for the time. And the dad that I had did it all himself, everything. That was how we were raised. Dad did the shopping, the cooking, the cleaning, worked at Boeing, could build a house from the ground up. He was the guy, if you've ever gone to Home Depot, he was the old guy telling the people who work at Home Depot how to do the things that they need to know how to do. That's my dad. Sort of the army of one, lone wolf dad. And there he is. That's Dad and me when I graduated from college many, many years ago. On the other hand, I had a wonderful mother too, but my mom lived in Manhattan, and from the time I was fairly young, and she married an opera singer. There is my stepdad, and they lived in Manhattan, 8 blocks away from the Metropolitan Opera, where my stepfather sang a lot. What that means is that as a kid, I would spend most of my time in Seattle with lone wolf army of one dad. And then I would go over to the East Coast, where I would be backstage at the Metropolitan Opera watching dozens of singers and tech staff and orchestra members and all of these people in this incredible chaos that came together into something that was really just amazing. And this was a normal part of my life, at least that part of my life. So on the one hand, I had the dad who was telling me, you're going to play an individual sport, not a team sport. You're going to play an instrument that is a solo instrument, not part of the band. And then in the other part of my life, everything was about team. Everything was about relying on other people. So I came in this very, very weird way to the ideas about team and the tension versus a solo kind of perspective. And when I entered academia quite a while ago now, the messaging that I saw really early in my career involved things like this. Make sure you have lots of solo publications, work with other people's fine, but we need to see you as a scholar. And I remember those kinds of things being told to me by my elders, my mentors, and that just being sort of a prevailing wisdom when I came to move up and start writing letters of recommendation. I sort of had that mindset that as a scholar, you had to be doing it all. But since I started, in the decades since I started, the messaging that I've been seeing has been rather different. It's been more like the following, right? Clearly, this person can work alone, but what about collaboration? Where's the evidence of being able to work in teams? This is the kind of thing that we are seeing more and more of a demand for, more and more of a valuing of, and more on the forefront of the conversations in promotion and tenure committees, universities trying to figure out how to accommodate these things, and often evaluation by people who have very different perspectives on what constitutes scholarship. So in my own upbringing, I sort of had this tension between doing everything yourself versus being part of a team. And then as I entered academia, I sort of felt both of those tensions as well. Well, we're going to talk today, obviously, about team science. And of course, there are many definitions of team science. Let me just power through one of them. They all have sort of the same key elements. The idea being that team science is going to leverage the strengths and expertise of professionals trained in different fields that's important that we're bringing together different pieces of things, as I'll say a little bit more about in just a second, in an integrated and collaborative effort. I'll say more about that as well, to address a shared scientific challenge, right? So we're all working together towards something. Now, I have to tell you, I am a quantitative methodologist, and so the idea of being alone, that's not foreign to me at all, right? I'm the last person to be asked out on a date, the last person to be asked to a party, but I am the first person to be asked to be a part of a team when it comes to putting together grants, comes to putting together these kinds of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some of the experiences that I've had, and I have to say I've been a part of a lot of really high functioning, amazing integrated teams. And I've been a part of some teams that really were just failures from the start for some of the reasons that I'll try to share with you as we go. All right. So what I'd like to do is just go through and give you some thoughts about team science, perspectives, little, dare I call it wisdom? I don't know if I do. The first thing, which seems like an odd place to start, but I think it's kind of important, and that is that not everything needs to be team science. There are a lot of problems that people work on that are highly valued that don't actually require a team. And sometimes we even feel more and more now pressure to incorporate and involve other people. And I'll say more about that in just a bit, but some questions don't lend themselves to team science. Sometimes we don't have the connections to do team science. Sometimes we don't have the personality to do team science. Not everything needs to be team science. This guy, during a pandemic, holed up at his farm and invented, oh, I don't know, like calculus, Newtonian physics, obviously he invented Newtonian physics, concepts of gravity, all of that, right? So that's what he accomplished, single author during so what did you do during the pandemic? Yeah, no pressure, no pressure. That didn't seem to require team science. He's okay. Maybe he wasn't even very nice to play with, I don't know. On the other hand, at the other end of the sort of team science continuum, we have the CERN Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, where one of their more recent efforts was a paper on the mass of the Higgs boson, which measured it to the greatest degree of accuracy to this particular point. And the paper that they produced had 5,154. Just statistically speaking, there's a very good probability that some of you at this talk were authors on that particular paper. But it was a 33-page paper, 9 pages of paper, 24 pages of authors and affiliations. So is that team science? Well, it certainly involved a lot of people. And in fact, it was team science in the sense that there were collaborations among 2 different teams that came together, apparently teams of like 2,600 people. But anyway, so the first thing really you need to think about is what I'm working on something that requires team science? And just because you are involved with multiple people doesn't actually make it team science. And there are, for example, projects that you can work on yourself. Now, as someone who does a lot of mentoring, both of students and of faculty, it is very, very common for me to take a project that I am working on, developing thoughts around, and involve some students, involve some other early career faculty so that we can work on it together, which is a good learning experience, sometimes to push my thinking, for me to push their thinking. That's not necessarily team science, though, just saying, hey, can you help, you want to help me out on this? Or, hey, I don't really want to do the coding on this. Or, hey, I'd really rather you go out and gather those data or code those videos or all that. That's not necessarily team science, just having people do other pieces of things that you wanted, that you could have done yourself, right? It's great to involve others, but it's not necessarily team science. One of my favorite, well, actually my favorite musician, okay, straight up, my favorite musician, much to my mom and stepfather's chagrin, is Prince. Amazing musician. And Prince has been with Prince and the Revolution, Prince and the New Power Generation, and out on tour, total team activity and crazy integration among all these performers. But back in the studio, Prince often played all of the instruments himself. He played over like 24, 25, 27 different instruments with tremendous proficiency. And so many of the songs that I know you enjoy, just as I do, there's a very good chance that he actually played all of the instruments on that, right? So just sometimes multiple people are involved, sometimes only a single person is involved. It's not necessarily team science. All right. The idea of team science is that it draws people in who play different instruments from you, who can do things that you cannot do. So people who have a very, very particular skills. And when I say the words very particular set of skills, I think of this. Some of you might remember Liam Neeson and take, I have a very particular set of skills. That was my Liam Neeson, a very, very lame Liam Neeson. Laura's shaking her head, fine. Laura, you can share with us later your better Liam Neeson. So the idea is that the person is bringing skills that other people don't have. The issue, though, is that, you know, we are so highly specialized now that we really need to start drawing in people who have these other kinds of skills. The world's just becoming more and more specialized. If you think about AERA has, I think, over 150 different SIGs, right, special interest groups, as people become more and more interested in parts of their respective disciplines, subparts, sub-subparts. APA, I think, has like 54 divisions. So people are starting to know about very small things, and I don't mean that critically, about very small things to a very large extent. And that means as you spend more and more of your time in those smaller domains, it becomes essential to pull in these people who have these other skills. You know, if I think about all of the grant panels that I have been on, or all of the reviews that I have been a part of, I have heard the following words before. Yeah, they have a statistician on the advisory board, but it's not a statistician who specializes in categorical data in longitudinal scenarios, right? And you're like, wow, really? Do we have to pull in people of that level of specificity? And maybe the answer is yes. So the idea of these teams is to pull in these people with different skills, preferably people who won't be a nightmare for the rest of you. In fact, fill in these things. What do the other people have? Here's my Liam Neeson Mad Libs. I have a very particular set of, might be skills, might be data, might be statistical capabilities, it might be schools to which I have access, it might be very special populations that I work with. These might be some of the things that define this person and doesn't make that person a nightmare, makes that person actually a blessing for you to have as part of your team. So we want to draw together people who have these pieces that complement each other. And when you do that, of course, we can do these big operatic productions. This was my childhood. This was my childhood. All right. Team science requires trust and willing to give up control. And I say that in a way where I have seen those characteristics operate much to the benefit of the team. And I say that where a lack of those kinds of things has really been to the team's detriment, right? So as I've said, we can't really play all of the instruments ourselves. You have to be willing, and this is hard for some people. You have to be willing to not understand everything that is going on in a project. You have to be willing to read a final project that comes out of this group and not understand everything that is there. You have to be willing to put your name on something that you didn't write sections of, don't even know if it's done correctly. And that's very hard for people. So there's a lot of trust, a lot of willingness to give up control. And for some of us who've historically had control issues, that's a very big step for us. But the therapy has been good. So as many of you, right, sort of as we joke about, you really have to play well with others. You really have to believe in the other people who are on your team. The teams also operate best when you're able to commit to the team. And here's what I mean by that. I have been a part of a lot of teams where there's tremendous ownership tension, and part of that's born out of control issues. But part of that, I think, here's a question that sums it up, right? Yeah, sure, but my data is still my data, right? So imagine a project where the team comes together, where people are gathering data in different geographic regions, for example, which is really a nice thing to do as part of a large team effort. But then at the end of the day, whose data are whose? I've seen a tremendous amount of infighting around those. And I think it is best summed up in the wisdom of Guns N' Roses. You can have anything you want, but you better not take it from me. I have seen a lot of tension in teams where that is the exact problem. People don't view their data or whatever they're bringing to the table as being part of the collective. It might be used to write that particular paper, but at the end of the day, this is mine, that's mine. It's almost as if you need a prenup going in, or you need a mediator as a member of this particular team to help keep people. And that's really not usually a successful recipe for that. One of my friends, Todd Little, always said something that I thought is extremely hokey, but here I am saying it. We need to move from me search to we search. There, I said it. Okay, very, very hokey. Also hokey, but I still like this, the idea that there's no I in team, right? And actually there is an I in team, but the I in team is always just the a-hole. There, I said it. Okay, that was for you, Laura. The idea behind team science is that it's going to allow you to do things that you couldn't do yourself, right? And so that means that you have to know what you can do, what you can't do. You have to know where your limitations are, where the things are that are necessary to create this larger project. You need these people who are being people that you can't possibly be. And what do those people bring to the table? What is the piece of the science that they bring? One answer is it might be just different perspectives. I have been on a number of teams where I worked with qualitative methodologists. So the project involved both quantitative aspects of things and qualitative aspects of things. And neither of us burst into flames. Neither of us turned into a pillar of salt. What we did do is we pushed each other to think about things, pushed each other to elaborate on things, to articulate assumptions. It is good to have people with different perspectives than you, helping you to think through things in ways that are different. So one of the things I think that makes for a successful team are differing perspectives and a willingness to share and listen to those kinds of perspectives. Certainly different skills, as we mentioned. For example, I might be a part of the team as an instrument development person, and I know a good bit about scale development, the psychometrics that need to go into instrument development, but I have no content knowledge. Oh my goodness, I don't know about anything. I used to know about stuff, as Laura said. I used to know about chemistry. Now I have a high school kid who asks me chemistry questions. I'm like, right, and I run off and Google it. Shh, don't tell him. But I would work with a content expert, right? Someone who knows whether it's about self-concept of mathematics or whatever the particular content is, and together we can develop instruments that can be used to measure people at different levels, for example. So bringing these complementary skill sets obviously is very, very useful. I mentioned data previously, having access to different data sets. There are a number of teams that I have worked on where API simply might not live in a particularly diverse environment, and the people to whom they have access are really not going to allow a broader generalizability that's necessary for the science. And so partnerships are struck up among people in different regions to try to pull in lots of different samples. And the idea in the end is that your science is better. You are able to make broader claims rather than just, you know, saying future research will look at other populations. No, this is your research. Look at other populations, bring it in. Try to understand what moderates what context effects exist. Do that now as part of what you're doing. It also gives you the opportunity to try different analytical things that you might not have thought about before. Let me just give you an example. There's something out there right now that has been developed over the last few years called the Psychological Science Accelerator. I'm just mentioning this as an example of what team science really can, how it can be embodied, how it can be in practice. The Psychological Science Accelerator, if you haven't heard of it, is a network of over 500 labs that are out there. And I say out there, I mean around the world. It's over 70 countries. On Antarctica has not joined yet. They've really been pretty, pretty stodgy about contributing to this. But the idea behind this is that you pitch a study to this group, to this board, and they evaluate the study and decide whether or not they want to take it on. And if they take it on, what they do is they pull in partners from around the world to be able to help you in gathering data, helping you to be able to create something that is much broader than your Psych 200 students or whoever it is that you have access to. And then when you have all of these data from these different locations, you can start to put into place some really nice modern analytic options like integrative data analysis, where you have what are essentially these beautiful multi-level techniques that try to model the data in an integrated fashion, obviously, but also acknowledging what the characteristics are that make these data sets different. Very, very nice. These are the kinds of cool things that you can do when you, I think very boldly, as this effort does, just as a nice example. I think it's actually quite visionary. In the particular project that we are doing, that Laura and Kimberly are going to tell you a lot more about, we're bringing together a lot of diverse perspectives, different expertise, obviously, sharing a lot of resources and creating a really nice collaborative community. I kind of get chills when I think about it, because I get to work with so many wonderful people as part of this project. And in this project, what we're doing is we are bringing to the table research methods, training, and mentoring, all in service of STEM research education, trying to build capacity to have a whole lot of different benefits. And some of the benefits that come out of this are things like, obviously, greater capacity, greater skill set with regard to quantitative methods for the scholars that we have participating, and you'll get a chance to meet some of our scholars. Stronger quantitative components of grant proposals to go out there around STEM education and issues of equity and access within STEM education. A lot of bonding with the STEM education research. So we're trying to bring people together so that they can share ideas with each other, not just with quant people, but with each other, so that the ideas are really growing. And yes, we are teaching people how to have close connection with methodologists. It's hard, takes a lot of training, and it's good for us too to learn these kinds of social skills. So I'd be lying if I weren't benefiting from this in some way here. But the research projects that are starting to bubble up through this project, which is been going on for the better part of this year, you can start to feel them coming to the fore as the scholars we have are pulling things together, drawing from their own content area, drawing from the quantitative skills that they're acquiring throughout this particular year. It's just crazy exciting. And ultimately, we hope that this is going to help have an impact on STEM education in the US. So the last thing that I will mention is that none of this can be done without really good leadership, organization, coordination. I've been part of teams where there are wonderful people on there and they're just crazy all over the place, not together. And I love this particular, I think it's an apocryphal quote. I think it really only just comes from the movie about Steve Jobs, maybe not from Steve Jobs himself, but when he was asked what, all of the rest of us can actually do stuff and play instruments, what do you do? His response was essentially, I play the orchestra. And in this particular project, the person who plays the orchestra very, very nicely is Laura Stapleton. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to our orchestra master, Laura.
Thank you very much, Greg.
I don't have to be your AV guy anymore, do I?
No, you don't. I'm going to be my own AV gal. Which, okay. It's because you've heard me play instruments that you know it would not be a good thing if I was playing an instrument.
You can sing though.
Oh, thank you. All right, I am trying to show my slideshow. All right, so folks, in my and I know that there were some questions in the Q&A box, but Greg, maybe you can look at those while I'm talking and then be prepared to maybe to answer some as my session ends. So in terms of program orientation, I'm now going to walk you through what our Scholars Program is and to let you know what the rationale is, what our goals are. But first, I'm going to tell you who's involved. We have Greg and I are the co-directors basically of this project. And we also have Kimberly, as we mentioned. She's a mentor to the mentors. We have a whole slew of mentors, which I'm going to show you. But then she also helps our program participants with their own mentor-mentee relationships. And we have the wonderful Dr. Ebony Terrell-Shockley, who is involved but not with us today, as she'll evaluate our program, as well as she's another source of mentoring for our scholars in terms of STEM education. We have we're formally calling them project coordinators, but to us, there are unicorns. They are incredibly valuable, hard to find people, and we found them and we're so excited. They provide a lot of the logistic help, technical support, and they actually hold office hours. They are a mentor as well to some of our program participants because they hold office hours and help out with programming and stats. And we'll see Tessa Johnson a little later on. She will be facilitating some of our panel conversation. So the broad purpose of our program is first to provide quantitative training for early career faculty and postdocs in U.S. higher ed institutions who are studying STEM education, equity, access, and diversity, because that has been identified as a concern going forward by NSF, that we need to address this problem that we do not have workforce diversity in STEM fields. And another part of that is of our program is that there's not just kind of a one-shot training. This is the scholars are coming up with their own program of interest, their project that they want to complete during the year. And then we provide that training and support that will help them to implement their project. They also, at the time of application to our program, need to identify a content area mentor who will also assist them. We have 4 specific goals of our program. The first is just, as Greg said, we want to improve the capacity of scholars in quantitative research, design, measurement, and analysis, especially measurement issues that don't get addressed as much in doctoral education in the US, at least. We reviewed some of the STEM education programs across the country and found that really the availability of quantitative research methods courses and analysis courses, and especially measurement courses, is limited. So we're trying to help early career scholars to obtain some of that education that they may have missed in their graduate programs. But also, we want to recognize that just by taking this program, they're not going to become experts in these methods. But what will happen is that the research questions that they can envision, because they've been exposed to some of these methods, will be broadened. So we're broadening the research question capacity of our scholars. The second goal is to support scholars with ongoing mentorship. So we have all taught many workshops in quantitative methods, and we realize that this one and done sort of approach doesn't really work well. You go and you learn something for 2 days, and then you get back home, and if you don't use it, you lose it, and oftentimes people don't use it. So this way they'll be trained, but they'll also have a mentor to walk along with them as they're trying to use that method. Our third goal was to develop a peer support network. So this cohort of 20 scholars would hang out together, they'd learn together. It's nicer when you've got a friend, if you're learning a new material, to talk about your angst with. And the fourth goal, and Greg was talking about this under Team Science, is really to develop appreciation and willingness to collaborate with methodologists, because we want to repeat many times that just because you learn multi-level modeling for a 2-day workshop does not make you the best person for your project if you're going to undertake multi-level modeling. You'll be able to communicate with an expert in multi-level modeling, which is really important, and you'll be able to realize the research questions you could ask with multi-level modeling, but nobody can become an expert in all these various methods that are being developed. So having an eagerness and willingness to collaborate with methodologists would be a wonderful thing. So that was our fourth goal. So the program, each year we're selecting 20 scholars to be part of this year-long program, and the little red dots show you where all the people are from our cohort this year. And these are our wonderful participants this year. You'll notice we're missing one person. Unfortunately, one of our scholars had a death in the family right before the program started, so she's deferred to next year. So we're looking forward to working with her next year. And so for each of these scholars, we pair them with a mentor who's an expert in the area that their project will entail. So I work in complex sampling designs, multi-level modeling, program evaluation with administrative data. So I'm working with 3 scholars, and you'll meet Zach a little later on. There's Zach right there. Greg is expert structural equation modeling, power analysis, group group comparisons, and he is working with 4 mentees. We have Tracy Sweet, who is our resident expert in social network modeling, multi-level modeling, Bayesian, and she is working, and she was a former teacher. She is working with 4 scholars who are pre-service education scholars, teacher education scholars. And we will be meeting Seema a little bit later on. We have Peter Steiner, who's an expert in replication analysis and causal inference, and he is working with 2 scholars who are working in program evaluation. And here's Claire will be talking to us a little bit later. Jeff Herring, our expert in longitudinal modeling and mixture modeling, is working with 2 scholars who are doing some advanced modeling. We've got Yang Liu, who's an expert in measurement and item response theory and modeling time response times, and he's working with 2 scholars. And we have Jisung Yang, who is also an expert in measurement and in evaluation, multi-level models of program evaluations with measurement issues. But there's two scholars who are developing their own instruments, their own questionnaires, or their own scoring of some latent construct of interest. So she's working with them on that. So we've paired mentees with their mentors to work throughout the year. And we start off with a bang, a week-long institute, and I realize this is very small to see, but I just wanted to give you a picture of what it looked like. The intention was going to be a face-to-face week of intensive discussion and getting to know each other and support. And of course, that had to be flipped over to a virtual setting. And we are going to be virtual again this summer. But we have 1 week where we do both asynchronous and synchronous work. And that week looks like this. On Monday, we talk about issues in research design and causal inference, and we have a speaker, a keynote speaker. And by the way, these topic areas, we just touched the surface. We're whetting your appetite to learn more about the topics. Tuesdays and Wednesday, we focus on issues in measurement, reliability, validity, introductory response models. Also, Kimberly talks about the mentor-mentee relationships. Thursday in the morning, we go through multi-level modeling, and in the afternoon do group comparison issues. And on Friday, we cover longitudinal modeling, and the program officer from NSF comes and talks with us. Throughout the week, we have a session on collaborations with methodologists. And this was a really innovative part of our proposal, is that we said, we would find methodologists from across the country and have them come visit us for 15 minutes on Zoom. And it was quite exciting until we're all on Zoom, so it's not quite as exciting. But for each of the topics that we go through, we have methodologists come talk with us, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. During this week, we have cohort building exercises amongst the scholars, and then we also do that mentor-mentee relationship building with breakout rooms. So let's just take a peek at Thursday in detail. And the way that we've decided to run this, and again, I know this is way too small, but I'm just showing you that we offer videos. So we have, this is the afternoon on Thursday. We have asynchronous videos. So there's 4 short 10 to 20 minute videos to watch about a particular topic. The handouts. We have a learning check. So there's a self-assessment for the scholars to do to see how well they got the material from the video. We also have a discussion board where we ask the scholars to reflect on the content of the videos and how that might relate to their project that they're going to be working on. And so they're encouraged to work with their smaller group on that discussion board. And during that time, we also have optional office hours. So if you run into problems with the video or the content in the video, you can just chime in and ask a question during office hours. Then we gather together for a synchronous discussion. So all 20 scholars plus the mentors gather together to go through any Q&A about the content, and then we break out into our breakout rooms to talk just in more detail and a more personal discussion. And then at the end of the topic, we invite our methodologists to come talk with us, and we have the methodologists who have specialties in this area. And this was our group comparisons session. So we have Catherine Mason, who focus on latent mixture models, and Diana Blackson, who studies moderation, and they shared with us how they work when they're the methodologists in the collaboration and what works for them. And so there's a lot of hints that our scholars received about how to make that happen. And I'm going to share those in a little bit. After the 1 week of our intensive summer institute, we then offer workshops throughout the year. And this is in collaboration with our Center for Integrated Latent Variable Research, SILVER. And so some of these topics these first topics were just for our scholars. And then these other topics are integrated into our larger SILVER group. And the scholars each are expected to take at least 8 of these workshops, those that are most relevant to their work. In the PDF, hopefully you have received now the handouts from this workshop. I'm not going to go through each of these just in thinking about the time. I'm not going to go through each of these workshops, but in the handout, you'll see a little description of what is taught in each of these and who is teaching it. And some of these folks, so this is Debbie Bandelos. She's not one of our mentors, but she's from James Madison University, expert in questionnaire item writing, who joined us. We also have Roy Levy from Arizona State University come and teach Bayesian analysis. And then this year, because there was some interest amongst our scholars of trying to navigate this idea, so that a lot of our scholars came from a qualitative background, but they wanted to get more quantitative training. So then they were faced with this juxtaposition of the two approaches and wanted to think more about what information they get from a qualitative approach versus a quantitative approach. And so we decided to have a speaker series. So that's sort of one of our workshops this year, is to help understand that nexus. So I wanted to show examples. So Emily, Dr. Jackson Oseji, she's studying the relationship between involvement and research of undergraduate students with their self-efficacy to teach science once they start teaching science. So in the red are the workshops that she has chosen. And here's Pratt, Dr. Shikar. He's looking at engineering education in higher ed and what are the factors that help or that lead to somebody being involved in entrepreneurship education, and he wants to make that more inclusive. And Melissa Navarro, she studies the perceptions that elementary ed teachers have about ELL students and their approaches and practices to teaching science to that population. And those in red are the workshops that she's chosen. So just to clarify, the program elements are the mentors themselves got trained on best approaches to mentoring and coaching. We have team building of the cohort to foster relationships. We have monthly meetings of the mentor with the mentee, as well as office hours, continuing office hours that our unicorns provide to the scholars. And at the end of the year, we will have a capstone conference where our scholars come and present their research, and they also meet our new cohort of scholars and hopefully broaden their network as well of both cohorts. Scholars' feedback to our initial institute has been wonderful. And we have great feedback of the mentors to the mentees too. It's been a wonderful experience for us. But this slide is just showing you everything about our program in one picture. And I see that there's questions in the Q&A, and I can take some of them now, or we can wait. Somebody should tell me what we should do. Greg?
Well, we're going to have a Q&A session that follows this, and some of them are really big, thoughtful questions that are hard to answer in 2 sentences. So if people are willing to stick with us afterwards, it might be fun to chat about some of those things.
Okay, great. All right, so In this next section, I just wanted to share with you, I mentioned we had those Meet a Methodologist, this innovative Zoom drop-in of our methodologists. We had these 12 folks join us over the course of the week, and their expertise ranges from research design to measurement to multi-level modeling, longitudinal modeling. And we pulled from their talks, we pulled out some salient things that we thought you would want to know. One is they always look for mutually beneficial partnerships. If they're going to collaborate with a content area researcher, they're looking for these things, and not just one of these things, preferably, all of them if you can do it, but it would be hard to join a collaboration just for one of these. But authorship, if you're, especially for early career scholars, methodologists, authorship can be a very important motivating thing. Funding, if you're on a grant and they can receive funding, that's always a good thing to add. Partnering with a fun team is it's personally really important for me. I like to enjoy my work. And then personal stakes. Some people, even though I am not a content area expert, I might find a topic really interesting and important. I'm working currently with somebody who has developed an intervention to reduce prejudice and bias amongst young kids in K through 12 settings, or sorry, in actually 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And that's a really important thing to me. And I think it's worth it just for that topic. She also included funding and authorship. And they're a pretty fun team. Questions to ask. These are both, the person who's asking a methodologist to join, as well as the methodologist should ask, what is the team's disciplinary makeup? Are you all, is this a team of 10 people and 9 of them are from your discipline, and I'm going to be the only outsider and I'm going to face a lot of resistance if I try to make suggestions? What's the time involvement that you're asking each of the team members? Is this collaboration time-bound? Is this just for this grant, or do we want to create a decades-long relationship, and you have these projects in mind that you're thinking about? And as Greg mentioned earlier, who owns the data? So this came up frequently among our methodologists, so it's clearly an important issue. And once you're in a relationship or a collaboration, they suggested several things to make it a healthy one. Communication. And I think that for any relationships, communication is the key. And Goldie told me to tell you that, Greg. And set guidelines for who has access, who owns that data, who has access to it, and how do you get projects approved? What if you want to take the data in a different way? Identify areas for reciprocal collaboration. This is really important for methodologists because oftentimes we feel like we're just the hired hand. We've come to do the stats that they didn't want to do, but what's in it for us? Oftentimes there are fascinating methodological questions. Like, what if we modeled it this way instead of this way? Would we get the same answer? So being appreciative of those sorts of research, methodological research questions is really appreciated. And finally, provide sufficient grant funding for project team members. And this seems like a no-brainer, but both Greg and I have been in projects where we have written that proposal, it got funded. For some reason, the funding was cut somewhat, especially NSF, and suddenly we're no longer needed. That's a good way to just kill that relationship. And it did in my case, and I think Greg has salvaged his, but I said bye. Oh, okay. So at this point, we were going to have Tessa sort of get the 3 of us to talk a little bit more about our experiences with collaborations. So Tessa, Unicorn Tessa, where are you?
Can you see me, Laura?
I can see you, yeah.
Okay, I'm here. Okay, so I've got Greg and Laura and Kimberly. All right, I'm going to start with some softball questions that I think maybe Kimberly and Greg have some answers to. So will you talk a little bit about the types of collaborative research that you've done and describe a little bit about the types of disciplines that were represented and how you all worked together as a group?
Sure. And hi, everybody. So happy to have this opportunity to visit with all of you. So I work on teams really frequently. Sometimes they're teams I largely identify as a mixed methodologist with a leaning towards qualitative work. So a lot of times I'm working with other qualitative researchers on a project. but sometimes I'm working across methodologies and across disciplines. So the collaboration that sticks out to me most is my collaboration with Dr. Kenneth Gibbs, who is currently a program officer at the National Institutes of Health. He has a PhD in immunology and a master's in public health. And we are both trying to better understand career trajectories, how people make decisions about whether or not they want to enter the academy as a faculty member in biomedical science, and how identity factors into that process, and how people's experiences with racism, with sexism during their graduate training and postdoctoral training might inform their decision making. So that collaboration has been really rich and really helpful. I think it's had its bumps and challenges because we have fundamentally different approaches to research, but I think coming together with our different perspectives has ultimately led us to have really interesting insights that have concrete implications, not only for education, but for how science is actually done.
All right, Dr. Griffin, I heard you say that there are some bumps and challenges. Greg, do you have any experiences that are similar? Have yours all been very smooth sailing?
Yeah, they've all been smooth, Tessa. I alluded to some of the bumps and bruises that occur in the relationships, and from a quant perspective, it's an interesting dynamic. To pull back, just to start with the broader context, I play in a lot of different sandboxes, and those might be engineering, they might be psychology, a lot of child development stuff, a lot of brain development in children. Work on projects with mothers who use substances during pregnancy. One of the teams that I've worked with now for the last, 5 or 6 years, I think, have to do with health disparities and vaccination and hesitancy among different groups to participate in vaccination, what kinds of things can be done to try to even some of those things out. So really interesting projects all over the place, in a good way from my perspective, very good. The role that I play is incredibly varied. Sometimes, as Laura said, we sort of fly in, do a power analysis, write some stuff, and then we're off. That's not generally the relationship I like to have. I really like to be all in on the project, and that's not just because I have control issues. It's because it's fun to see something go from the idea drawing table all the way to gathering the subjects, the answering the question, doing the science. So I really enjoy being a part of it. Something that Laura alluded to that makes it especially enticing for us as quantitative methodologists is that our own research as quantitative methodologists is not just to be this hammer that goes out and hunts for nails. We try to develop new methods for people to use. And the ideas for these new methods almost always come from the interactions that we have with people. And I will tell you, those are the most profitable relationships, where I get to come up with a new type of longitudinal modeling because I am dealing with a team that studies child development. Or I have to think about new ways to assess reliability when the measures that we use with people at different ages start changing in terms of what's developmentally appropriate. So these are important, I would say, important kinds of methodological issues that influence my own development as a scholar and then contribute to solving real world problems. I almost never am just working sort of in a back room deriving things myself. In terms of the bumps and bruises, I think that I have felt is it comes from a lack of integration among the team members primarily, where people just aren't on the same page. Part of that is a management issue. Part of that is a territoriality issue. I happen to have a belief as a quantitative methodologist that what I do actually should help to unify an entire grant proposal, for example, that the way that hypotheses are articulated should align with the way the analyses are proposed, should align with the hypotheses, should align with the outcomes that are targeted and all of that. And some of the less successful relationships that I have seen are where people view this as you go do your part, you go do your part, you go do your part, and we'll staple them together and ship them out the door. And I think it's much better when everybody is all in, even if I'm reading stuff I don't understand, even if other people are reading stuff they don't understand. We all have this shared investment in developing a common narrative. And I think that serves you from the very first time you're spitballing, coming up with ideas, all the way through the end where you're doing the final revisions on a paper that gets accepted for publication. So being all in together, I think, is what really helps to prevent a lot of those bumps and bruises.
Thanks, Greg. Laura, I'm going to turn it to you. So what kind of collaborations have you had that have been successful, and have there been any that weren't as successful, and what were the common themes about the successful ones maybe?
Well, I think that I have found that when people say, this is the way we've always done it, like if you make a suggestion, this is the way we've always done it, this is the way that journal always accepts paper, or that never appears, then that always makes me a little anxious, because you have to take so much effort to explain why things have changed. I'm sure that they can see the changes in their discipline have occurred over time, but there's also changes in research methods, quantitative analysis, publication types, or just approaches to design. So I think when there's somebody who is welcoming of my knowledge about where the field is going, I think that works really well. And I'll use that as an example. This project I talked about with the 3rd and 4th, 5th grade, this curriculum in the schools that's trying to reduce prejudice. And it's Dr. Melanie Killen is the PI. And it's an intervention that is given to kids within the school. It's a classroom-based intervention, and the kids watch an interaction online, and then they answer questions about it. But then the teacher runs a discussion with the kids. And in setting this whole thing up, she has come from a laboratory, psychological laboratory framework, and has not worked in schools before. And so we had this, we had to talk about, like, what are all the considerations? This is now and it's just funny, and she understands it, but she was always thinking about the number of kids. There's 900 kids. That's a lot of kids. And then I had to keep saying, but there's only 46 teachers. There's only 46 teachers, because in a curriculum-based design, the level of the classroom is actually the units you're analyzing. So just walking through that for a month, trying to realize it's really not the number of kids. So so that was new to her. Some measurement issues were new. I'm still trying to and I think this is going to become more and more important as we go forward. Pre-registration of your study is something that doesn't feel very comfortable for a lot of people who have never done it before, but I think it's going to become a more and more important issue. And planned missing designs. There's for this study, there's like 3 hours of assessments that these kids would have to do. And you don't actually have to have the kids all take all of the exact same items. You could have planned missingness. Only some kids see these questions and some kids see these questions. And that, again, is something that somebody's very uncomfortable with if they've never seen it. And so just working with people who are open to those sorts of things is great.
So I have one other question that I saw in the Q&A that I thought might be fun to ask you all. And the question is, from Ting Dai, how do you balance working in an interdisciplinary space with having your own research signature? And I think this applies mostly to junior scholars who are trying to make their own mark, but also trying to demonstrate, like what you said, Dr. Hancock, that they can play well with others and be parts of teams. Do any of you have an experience from your own junior days where you were trying to set out on your own, but also trying to navigate that team science balance? Sorry, I sprung this one on you. I didn't tell you you're going to get that.
No, it's okay. And actually, if I could add one thing to the previous comment, and then I'll jump into the next comment. So I think one of the things, just kind of zooming out a little bit, that leads to us having more effective collaborations, and it wasn't something that I knew about beforehand, but I think is really important now, is to have a frank conversation about what we think about knowledge and how we know what we know. at the very beginning of the collaboration, particularly when you're working across disciplines or across methodologies. So I found, having really frank conversations around what do we learn from qualitative work? What do we learn from quantitative work? How can they complement each other? And you're asking me a qualitative question, but you want me to give you numbers back, and that's not the way this works. So for us to have really meaningful conversations about how we could learn what we wanted to know, but how could we also speak in a way that different communities were going to get it based on how they take up information and how they make sense of information, was really, really important in the success of my collaboration. And I think being honest about it in the beginning and where our biases are helped make things make more sense. And it wasn't a fight later on when we had disagreements about methodological choices or reporting of data. It was more understanding like, oh, this is Kimberly's lens, this is Kenny's lens, and this is why I think that we should present our data in this way for this particular audience. In regards to your next question about charting your own path when you're working in team-based science, I think I often come back to who are you as a scholar and what contributions are you trying to make, and how can you make that consistent when you're working on a team? So I consider myself having like a content-based identity, but I also have a methodological identity. How do you, as you're, at some point going to have to write a personal statement about who you are and the work you do, how do you draw a thread through around why it makes sense that you were on this team and how it fits into your identity as a scholar? So, yes, I might have been involved in all of these teams, but I've always been the person who's responsible as the qualitative lead, or I've always been the person who's thinking about equity and justice related issues in this particular context. That way you don't look scattered, you're just contributing to multiple projects based on your strengths, if that makes sense.
And I would just like to add, I think it's really important for early career all scholars really, is to write a brand statement. What is your brand? What do you want to be known for? And if that's the case, then anytime you're going to do some team science, you have to realize, wait, does that match my brand? Or am I being pulled in? And so if I had started this all with, well, I'm knowledgeable, I am an expert in multi-level structured equation modeling, and then I see that I'm being pulled into a project that involves a t-test and something, well, that's not really part of my brand. Do I want to do that? Are there other parts of this collaboration that would be important to me? Oh, it's a fun group. They're going to pay me a lot of money. Okay, maybe, but evaluate every opportunity with how well it fits your brand.
Can I just expand on that a little bit? I think Kimberly used a great word, thread, and you're using brand. The idea, like it or not, is that you have to be recognized for something. And especially early on, as you're trying to establish yourself as a scholar, I always think about it as, what's the overlap among all these projects that you have decided to be in? And the answer can't be they all involve teams. They have to be some aspect of some commonality, and some commonality that you are using to define yourself as a scholar. People, as part of a tenure process, almost always have to recognize you for being about something, being expert in something. And, I like, as a methodologist, to sort of Mary Poppins in and out of different research families and help out, and then sort of fly off with my umbrella. But that doesn't define me as a scholar. There are certain methodological things that I do that helps to unite these projects. Now, of course, I'm much later in my career and I can do pretty much whatever I want. But early on, it really was, what is it that I do? What is it I want to be known for? And I want to use that to help make sound choices. And as a methodologist, what that meant was being involved in group projects where I got to use those methodologies in service of very interesting and important questions. But it also meant being able to bring those ideas back to my own methodological community and my own methodological agenda to help develop new tools so that other people could be using those as well. So all of my circles sort of overlapped, not just at methodology, but certain types of methodology. And that's where I tried to make my own, the contributions in my own domain as well. It's not easy. It's not easy, but Laura's wisdom, I think, about branding is a good one. Figure out who you are, what you want to be, and then use that to guide you as much as possible in that thread that Kimberly said.
Well, Thank you all so much. That was really helpful for me personally, so I hope it was helpful for everybody else in attendance. Dr. Griffin, I think we're going to send this on to you to talk to us more about mentorship.
Sure. All right. Let me share my screen here. Well, I am happy to have the opportunity to chat with all of you about the important role that mentoring plays in these types of collaborations that we've discussed so far today. So I've spent the last 10 years or so thinking and reading and doing research on mentoring. And I hope that I'll be able to share some of the ideas I've learned and the ways to think about these relationships that will reshape how you engage in mentoring practice. So whether you're the junior person or the senior person in the relationship, I hope something that I have to share today will be of benefit to you as you think about your relationships moving forward, particularly in the context of doing research generally and team-based research specifically. So first, I want to start with a common assumption that I often hear in educational practice and research, that if you have a mentor, it's going to result in positive outcomes, that mentoring is inherently this good thing. But scholarship and discourse shows us that this isn't always the case, and experiences can be really uneven. So we can hear narratives of people who have these really rich and really meaningful mentoring relationships that lead to them being better scholars and better thinkers, and in many ways open the door to a career that they never thought about. And that's my story of mentorship. But then alternatively, you hear these narratives of people who have relationships and things do not go well. And, you know, rather than making them feel more empowered and like they have greater self-efficacy about their work, they have less efficacy about their work. They feel like they don't want to be in the academy at all anymore. And there are even times when we have these narratives and they're about the same mentor, right? So when we look at this unevenness in relationship and we look at this unevenness in outcomes, I think it's really important to think about the fact that it's not always whether or not you have access to a mentor that matters, right? What differentiates good outcomes from not so good outcomes is really tied up in relationship quality. So my work and the work of others suggests that having a mentor matters, but we have to think about the tenor and the tone of the relationship, how well the two people connect, and how the relationship is structured. And that in many ways, this is the vehicle between having access to mentorship and having these positive outcomes that we want to see.
Kimberly, if you're, the screen isn't being shared, so I'm not sure if you're intending to share right now.
I am intending to share right now.
Great.
Sorry, hold on. Let me make sure that my share screen actually works properly. Right, I'm going to try again. All right, is that working now?
Yep.
Okay.
There we go. Yep.
Okay, so now this probably makes a lot more sense. So again, that access to mentoring is important, certainly linked to positive outcomes, but really the vehicle between access and these positive outcomes is relationship quality and having a quality interaction, which is the tenor and the tone of the relationship. So I want to talk a little bit today about what makes for good outcomes and how we can promote those good outcomes in our relationship. In other words, how can we directly address relationship quality? So there are three things that I think that we can think about in more intentional ways. The first being that we can do a better job of aligning the goals of the relationship, the needs of the mentee, and the strengths of the mentor. Secondly, we can clarify our expectations and be more specific about cultivating a specific type of interaction set on mutual expectations. And then finally, we can be more intentional about our efforts to promote care in relationships and minimize dysfunction. And I think that one potential way for us to do this is through equity-minded practice. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well today. Okay, so let's start with aligning goals, mentee needs, and mentor strengths. And there are times that I'll talk to a student, as I mentioned before, and they'll be really struggling with their relationship with their mentor. And they're really reluctant to say so because they're working with someone who's really well known, or someone who's really well known as someone who's a good mentor, or someone that they like as a person, just somebody who they're just like, I don't have any problems with them as a person, but they're not providing me with the support that I need. So I've, in my own work, been moving away from framing people as good mentors or bad mentors, unless they're really engaging in dysfunctional behaviors. Rather, I would think about, is there a good alignment between what the mentee needs, what the mentor does really well, and the goals that the mentee is trying to reach? So figuring out what you need and what your strengths are can sometimes be really challenging, but there are some frameworks that can be helpful in making some sense of this and naming the things that we actually need in the context of our relationships. So Kathy Cram is one of the leading and forerunning scholars in mentoring research. Her book's called Mentoring at Work. And she suggests that the forms of support that folks ideally get from mentoring relationships fall in these two big buckets, that there's professional related support and there's this socio-emotional, psychosocial support that individuals can get. In my application of her framing, I drill down a little bit more and think about how professional support shows up in the academy. And I've conceptualized it as having two core forms. There's this professional support that's long-term skill development and career development. And then there's advising and support that really focuses on navigating a specific institution or a specific process. So if we're thinking about collaboration in the context of research, it's closer to that long-term skill development component. So it may be most helpful for you to think through where you might need help and support as a mentee, where your strengths are as a mentor, and where to, and how to sort that out within the context of your relationship if you start from there, that place, right? So where are your strengths as a researcher? Where are your needs as a researcher? And how can I provide support within the context of the relationship? So what you see here on the screen was actually developed based on the needs of this year's cohort of scholars. We asked them before beginning the program where they anticipated that they would need the most help and the most support. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a qualitative researcher, and I couldn't help but start to sort the responses into a series of categories. So these were the main categories that we saw in folks' responses, that some folks felt like they were going to need help in terms of structure, that they were going to need help in the research design, what specific questions should they be asking, how should they construct those questions, how would they make sense of like what an appropriate timeline was to complete their project. Some people said that they needed help with mechanics, so how they were actually going to go through the process of executing the method, that they could choose the method, but they weren't quite sure how to do it. So how did they actually go through the execution of the process? Some people had questions about the data. So how they were going to collect data, how they were going to figure out what instruments made the most sense, or how they were going to develop specific questions that they were going to use to collect their data. Other folks talked about analysis. So felt like they could go through the mechanics of, running whatever analysis that they were going to do, but how did they make sense of the data? How did they interpret it? And how did they start to tell a story with their data? Some folks had concerns about reporting, so writing and presenting the data that they ultimately had analyzed. And then finally, it was really interesting. Some people talked about needing help in terms of support. So wanting to feel like their mentor was there to encourage them and it was going to help them through the peaks and valleys associated with engaging in research. So there's a couple of things that I think are important to notice here. That research support can be very general, but it also has specific nuances, and we have to be mindful of where our strengths lie and where our needs lie in more specific ways. It can be helpful to take a step back and think about, okay, yes, I need help on this research project, but where specifically do I need help? What areas in which do I feel strong or I already have support? And what areas do I feel like I'm going to need a little bit more guidance on if I'm the mentee? And if I'm the mentor, are there certain areas that I always find myself going back to that I feel like are my strength? If I'm working with someone and it may not necessarily be the mode of analysis I always use, what are some of the other areas that I might be able to find support? And then the second piece that I think is important to remember, again, is that this socio-emotional dimension of relationship showed up in terms of needing support on completing research, and that we often forget to see people as whole people, that yes, we are here to do a certain task, but that caring, that motivation, that encouragement is going to be part of these relationships as well. So we wanted to take a moment to play with this framing and start thinking about where your needs and your strengths might lie. So we're going to ask everybody, we're going to engage in a couple polls. So we're going to ask everyone to take a moment to think for a second about a project on which you're currently working. So first, for our early career scholars in the audience, What are 3 areas in which you have the greatest needs? So think for a moment. We're going to have the poll appear. Do I need to stop sharing screen for folks to see it, or can you see it? Oh, there's the poll. So you can reflect on your needs now. And for other folks in the audience who might want to also address this question, think back to early in your career. What were the 3 areas that you felt like you had the greatest need? Structure, mechanics, data, analysis, reporting, or support?
This might be set up as a select one instead of select multiple.
Oh, goodness.
Just going to warn you that.
It's okay. We'll then choose one.
So what's the one?
Choosing 3. Thank you. Sorry for the confusion, everybody. Just select one. Okay, maybe just a couple more seconds. All right, can we see the results of the first poll? So most folks felt like they needed support in regards to analysis. So making meaning of findings and really just making sense of what the data story is. And then the second most, it looks like, was structure, or no, I'm sorry, the second most was support, right? Again, this socio-emotional motivational component, and then structure. So how to engage in design, how to write good research questions. Great, thank you very much. So let's put up the second poll question, which asks you to put on your hat as a mentor. So for our early career folks, I'm sure that there are plenty of conditions in which you serve as a mentor. For our more experienced mentors in the audience, think a little bit about the areas that you feel most confident in offering support and guidance in. Could we put up the poll, please, the second one? So what is the one biggest strength that you think you have, that you're most helpful in terms of guiding structure, offering socio-emotional support, engaging in analysis, or helping people think about data collection? We'll give folks just a few more moments. All right, can we close the poll maybe and see the responses? So this aligns relatively well with folks said, with what folks said they needed, that people feel most confident in their ability to provide socio-emotional support during the research process. And this is something that a lot of folks identify as a need. They also feel relatively confident in helping with analysis, and that they feel confident in their ability to help with structure. So, again, it's really important to take this moment to think about, as you enter any project, what are the things that I actually need, and what are the things that I'm looking for in the context of my mentoring relationship? And then to have the opportunity as a mentor to think a little bit about, given this project, where are my strengths and what do I feel like I can provide? And then have a conversation about the degree of alignment between those two things. All right, thanks so much for participating in that with us. So the second thing that I think helps a lot when we're talking about relationship quality and mentorship is setting some expectations about the ways that the people involved in the relationship will interact with each other. And one key part of that understanding is reciprocity, and thinking about reciprocity and the many ways that it can function within the context of a relationship. So our discourse about mentoring largely focuses on this unidirectional relationship. We talk a lot about what mentees or proteges are supposed to get, and what mentors should and should not do to maximize those relationships. But more modern conceptualizations of mentoring and frameworks suggest that the most rewarding relationships are in fact reciprocal. And if we think about what mentors can, as much as we think about what mentors can do to improve relationship quality, we have to think about what mentees can do as well that maximize their relationships. And I particularly like social exchange theory as a way to think about mentoring. It basically suggests that relationships continue when both parties benefit. And so when the benefits of interaction outweigh the costs, the relationship is going to be richer, it's going to continue, and it's going to be more fulfilling for both individuals. So we can have better relationship quality when we're being intentional about thinking about how both people benefit and naming what both people hope to gain from the relationship at the beginning. So in addition to being mindful that relationships can and should be reciprocal, I think understanding that reciprocity comes in many forms can be really helpful in informing our interactions. Within social exchange frameworks, there's a branch that focuses on how reciprocity takes place. And the study in this area is called Structures of Mutual Dependence. And it brings a deeper understanding of reciprocity, what reciprocity can look like, and how benefits are actually distributed within the context of a relationship. So there are these three forms of reciprocity when we're talking about structures of mutual dependence. There's direct exchange. So one person is giving to the other person is giving back. It's more akin to a friendship. There's kind of an equal give and take within the context of a relationship. In my own work on mentorship, I found that direct exchanges tend to emerge over long periods of time, and that isn't the most common format of exchange or reciprocity within mentoring relationships. Instead, we see more examples of generalized exchange, which is when you interact with somebody. So say a mentor is interacting with a mentee and they get direct benefit from that. The mentor's benefit is more indirect. They benefit because that person goes out into the world and does incredible things. They mentor other people and advance the way that we think about a topic in the field. Maybe they get some socio-emotional benefit from doing this work. It fulfills a need or a desire that they have in terms of making contributions to the academy. So the benefit isn't as direct. It doesn't come back to you in the same ways. And when people are engaging in generalized exchange in the context of research, it usually comes in the form of coaching or instruction, that they're not necessarily collaborating on a project together, that they're thinking about how they can help someone else do their work. The final form of exchange that's discussed within structures of mutual dependence is productive exchange. And this is closer to collaboration, that there's an interaction between two people, but ultimately the focus is on the creation of a third thing that both people are benefiting from. So I think it's important to think about at the beginning of your mentoring relationships, are you engaging in generalized exchange? So is your mentor anticipating that they're coaching you in your own project, and their benefit is ultimately going to be whatever you go off into the world and do and the ways that you contribute to work moving forward? Or is the benefit more productive in the sense that you're collaborating on a project and that you're both going to benefit from the outcome, which ultimately leads to a different set of conversations that I saw in the chat and in terms of questions around, well, who's going to be first author, or what does authorship even look like? Who might be taking the lead on different papers? What does the division of labor look like? So determining what kind of exchange you're engaging in ultimately would lead to the next set of conversations that would make your relationship go more smoothly. The second part of thinking intentionally about how we interact with each other is ironing out the nuts and bolts of what your interactions will actually look like. And this part often feels awkward or uncomfortable or unnecessary, but I've found it really, really helpful to be specific about these three categories of dimensions of our relationships with each other. So first, I think it's really important to clarify how often we'll check in with each other and who's going to initiate the conversation. Are we meeting weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, as needed, and who is reaching out to whom? I think it's really important to have a conversation about what mediums we will and will not use for communication. Some folks feel really strongly about not using text messages or not doing personal phone calls. Some people are really comfortable with that. Some people prefer email. So having a conversation about how are we going to reach out to each other and what mediums are we going to use to facilitate our meetings and feedback is really important. And then finally, having a conversation about how much feedback and guidance will be provided is also an important construct of our relationships. So thinking back to that earlier conversation about, are we collaborating or are we coaching? And what kind of feedback are we going to be giving? And how much time will that take? How much independence will each individual in the relationship have? How are we structuring the nature of our collaboration or coaching relationship? And just having some concrete conversations about that can be very helpful. So the final thing that I wanted to chat about today is about the importance of care and efforts to minimize dysfunction in relationships. So while there's definitely a conversation to be had about more extreme cases of cruelty and dishonesty in mentoring relationships, I want to talk about this topic in a somewhat different way today. Much of the research that I've done speaks to how our social identities show up in how we navigate the academy and how we think about our work, about our commitments to the topics that we want to study, and the demands on our time and energy outside of the context of what we would consider normal academic work. So in short, our identities matter a lot. And I proposed a framework, which you'll see here on the screen in a moment, that suggests that the identities of mentees and mentors are really important and have a role in shaping whether or not people have access to mentoring, the quality of their relationships, and the outcomes of their relationships. In other words, and more specific to our conversation today, relationship quality is informed by our identities and how we navigate them. I'd also suggest that they're informed by the organizational and structural dynamics of the academy, but we could talk about that on another day. So in short, I think it's important to not ignore people's identities, that we should acknowledge them and talk about who we are in relation to our work, because it creates deeper opportunities for the development of trust and learning. It's also really helpful for us to be mindful and aware of our own biases and expectations of both mentors and mentees based on their identities. So as mentors, research suggests that women are expected to be more caring. People of color are often sought out and expected to be more available. And that if we think about mentees and perspectives on them, women and men of color may be expected to be less able scholars or less invested in academic work, or perhaps more interested in teaching or other dimensions of academic work that aren't necessarily as connected to research. So it's really important for us to check those biases because they can have real meaningful implications on relationship quality. So I don't want to leave you with just a lot of thinking and hopefully good thinking. I want us to think a little bit about what we should do with this information and how we can use it to inform our practice moving forward and our work as both mentees and mentors. So I want to start with offering some guidance about how we begin our relationships and how we think about whether or not our relationships are in alignment between the needs and strengths of the pair. So in terms of mentees, start by asking yourself a series of questions. Really think intentionally about your short and your long-term goals. I think it's really important to be clear about your needs across each dimension of research. So thinking about those 6 categories that we initially thought about, really starting to name, and I do like the top 3, what 3 areas do you feel like you have the most significant needs in as you're going to engage in whatever project that you're undertaking? And for mentors, we need to ask ourselves some questions too. We need to think critically about what our strengths are as mentors, whether or not we feel comfortable providing support and guidance beyond this specific project. So are we signing up for a longer term relationship, or are we signing up for a relationship that's very specific to the task that we're trying to create? What kinds of support are you anticipating providing? And are you thinking about your relationship as one where you're collaborating? So are you engaging in productive exchange together? Or do you see yourself as more of a coach? Or do you see yourself as offering guidance that's going to help that other person complete their project, but you're not necessarily directly involved in it? And a note on identity, I think a lot about who you are and how it has an impact on what you need and what you expect in the context of your relationships. So I'll share that as a Black woman, I know that when I was a mentee, I wanted to get a better understanding of how to navigate the academy and highlight the importance of my research without redefining why equity matters over and over again, for example, if I was thinking about my scholarship. So that was something that was important for me to talk about with my mentors as I was thinking about how to execute specific projects. Now, as a mentor, I'm thinking a lot about how my identity may expose me to more asks, as well as some of the constraints on my time and capacity as a mother of a toddler. So that's one of the things that I have to keep in mind as I start to think about, well, what am I able to provide and what are my strengths as I show up in a relationship? Second, and again, I know it's awkward, but it is important for us to take the time to define the parameters of our relationships and put our understandings in writing. So I think it's important to ask ourselves a series of questions. First, where's the focus of the relationship? What are we talking about here? What kinds of support are going to be provided, and really putting it down in writing? Are we engaging in coaching? Are we engaging in collaboration? And really being mindful of that. And then again, clarifying the nature of the interaction. So really putting in writing how often we're going to meet, how feedback is going to be given, what's the timeline for the receipt of work, how are we actually going to engage each other and having meaningful conversations about what that's going to look like moving forward. And again, please, please, please put it in writing or email or whatever. And then finally, perhaps one of the most frequently asked questions that I received, how do we acknowledge identity and its role in relationships in really intentional ways? And so I have an acronym like many people do and recommend that we engage identity with care, which includes 4 specific principles. So first, when we're talking about identity generally, but particularly in the context of mentoring relationships, that we should be curious about identity, that instead of ignoring it, we should invite it into the room. It may not always want to enter, people may not always want to talk about identity in the context of their work, but making it clear that someone's identity-based experiences are always welcome. So be curious about who you both are and what identities matter to you and why. And I often broach this in a conversation with, what's important for me to know about you that I may not know already? Or I share a story about what motivates me in my research and how that's connected to who I am, and invite folks to share the same. Second, I think it's important for us to be aware that we need to cultivate our ability to recognize that we are all works in progress and that we all carry stereotypes and biases about those in groups we don't occupy. And so really start to be mindful, be more intentional, be a student of these biases. And when we make mistakes or incorrect assumptions, name it and apologize for them. Third, I think it's really important to recognize and validate others' lived experiences as real. Just because we haven't experienced these same dynamics doesn't mean that they're not happening or that they may not be very difficult or challenging. And I often share the story of working with a mentee who was trans and was going through a transition and had a surgery and was navigating both how to take a leave of absence from the institution, but also how to navigate dealing with name changes and other dynamics and other structures at the institution. And that while our institution was named as being very LGBTQ friendly, that these were the barriers and the challenges that they were dealing with. And it was really important for me to do my own work and listen and validate this experience that was quite unfamiliar to me, but it helped me understand this student and helped me support them in their work in more meaningful ways. And then finally, I think it's important to really engage and to deal with and acknowledge and support students through their identity-based experiences, but also not forget the content of the work and what you've come together to do. I have to understand that if I want to support my mentees in the ways that I want to, that there's certain things that I need to understand about them, that there's certain things about their experiences that I want them to feel comfortable in sharing with me, but there are goals that we're trying to attain, and we need to continue to come back to those goals and center those goals and figure out how we can make progress towards their professional goals, as well as me getting to know them and really caring about them as individuals. Okay, well, let me transition. So I hope that that was helpful in terms of sharing a little bit more about our experiences and what makes sense in terms of cultivating mentoring relationships and hopefully strengthening the relationships that y'all already have, and hope to address some of the questions that have come up in the chat about mentoring as we move into the next phase of our conversation. And I think I'm handing the mic and the virtual podium over to Tessa Johnson, who's going to facilitate a conversation between some of our scholars.
All right, thank you so much. So I'll have Dr. Claire Meters, Dr. Seema Rivera, and Dr. Zach Barnes unmute your video. All right, we're all here. So I have some questions for you, and I wanted to start out first by just letting you all introduce yourselves, tell us where you are right now. Yeah, I'll be quiet.
Sure, I can start. I guess we can go like alphabetically by first name maybe. So I'm Claire Metters, and I'm an assistant teaching professor at UC San Diego. But when I joined the program, I was a postdoc at Cornell University. And so I've been a part of this program kind of during my career transition.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Seema Rivera. I'm at Clarkson University in upstate New York. So I did this program last year, or last year into this year, and I go up for tenure this fall. So I guess almost mid-career. I don't know if that counts as mid-career.
Hi, my name is Zach Barnes. I'm an assistant professor of special education at Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee.
All right, so I'm going to just start with some general questions. You all are both, faculty in your own right, but you're also in this program where you have a mentor, but you've probably also served as a mentor. So I was just wondering, tell us about ways that you have served as a mentor or a mentee, and what has made these relationships successful. And I'll start with Claire, just to make it easy, and then you guys can jump in as you like.
Yeah, thank you, Tessa. So I guess when thinking about this, definitely in informal and formal capacities. When I was a graduate student and a postdoc, I would mentor more junior researchers in the lab. So anything from high school students to undergraduate students to other junior grad students. And then definitely informal mentoring that wasn't for research projects. So groups where it was really just to provide support to students navigating college and grad school, academia in general. Now that I am a new faculty member, I'm mentoring I just started mentoring 2 undergraduate students who are going to be joining me as master's students this fall. And really, Dr. Griffin has been so helpful just thinking about how to approach these mentoring relationships as well. One thing that has worked well for me in the past has always been open lines of communication and talking about expectations and talking about our kind of guidelines for our mentoring relationship up front, but really revisiting those and kind of showing, now that I'm in a mentor position, really making it clear that I'm open to feedback on my mentoring and will be like setting aside actual formal time for discussions at the beginning of every quarter where we go through a guidelines document that I'm currently crafting for spring quarter, but that sort of outlines both my expectations and what students can expect from me, and that's subject to change every quarter as their needs change as they advance in projects.
Thanks, Claire. Seema, looks like you're unmuted.
Sure. I think one thing I learned, about mentoring this past year, even more so, is that there are different mentors for different aspects of my life. So there's, professional mentors and then personal mentors, and kind of figuring out who falls into what category. As a junior faculty, you get assigned, I think at most places, a faculty mentor. And so my mentor helps me navigate things in the university that I wouldn't know, but there are other people in different departments that help mentor me in other ways. And Dr. Griffin's presentation with the mentoring, when I saw it this past year, I was like, why have I not seen this before? It was awesome, because I work with teacher educators. And so we put our student teachers in with mentor teachers all year. So we really look into that mentoring process of how they bring the student teachers back into schools and then becoming teachers. And we do this, kind of informal method of looking at the mentors and who's a good mentor and who's not a good mentor. And so Dr. Griffin her presentation made me look at that in a different way about the alignment of the mentee and mentor. And sometimes that is more important than just, these objective checklists of looking at mentors. So, and then I also mentor, my students. I work with master's students. I work with the science and math pre-service teachers, but I have had students from different disciplines come to me and say, they said, oh, you look more like me, so I just feel comfortable talking to you. And so I get that. So of course I'm going to be there as a support too, informally. So I feel like I've learned that there's many different kinds of mentoring. And it's been a learning experience.
I guess very similar to my colleagues, but Dr. Griffin's presentation, which is something that when you think back into graduate school, you wish you had as you're starting in your lab, so that things could be more formalized. So I learned a bunch as kind of my second year as a faculty member, as I'm starting to take on undergraduate students, to start working with them and mentoring them of how things that we need to talk about and be open. And then also how I approach people that I want to help mentor me, because we need to be reaching out and talking to people. Like Sima was saying, there are different types of mentors that you kind of want. So it's been super helpful in this program to have a mentor, and also learning about different mentorship styles.
So now I'm going to take you, it sounded like you were all talking a bit more about your own roles as mentors. Think about yourself as a mentee, and specifically in this program, you're assigned to a quantitative mentor, and you also have a content area mentor who's in your own corner to help you navigate that research process. Do you have any experiences about being a mentee at this stage that you'd like to share with anyone?
Yeah, I think definitely having like being on the other side of having conversations about expectations was super helpful at the beginning of the program. My quantitative mentor and I decided early on that we were going to do monthly meetings, and each month, like as I made progress, I would kind of write up really short, like just like one-page summaries of what I had been up to and things I wanted to chat about. And that was really helpful just for accountability. I think one thing that I always knew first year faculty were super busy, but I think I didn't quite realize how busy it would be during a pandemic. But having that like accountability from meeting with my mentor, but also just the patience from my mentor as well, just with some months I've been more productive than others. And that just, it's been really helpful, I think, especially when starting a new position, just to have someone who you know is like in your court, kind of making sure that you kind of keep a project moving along, but also is like understanding that you have other things that you have to do as well. That just has been so helpful this year.
Yeah, Seema, go ahead.
I was just going to say my quantitative mentor, Dr. Tracy Sweet, has been awesome, and I just want to reiterate the patience part. Of course, with COVID this year, it just made things more complicated, but I never felt, pressured in any kind of bad way. She was really flexible and patient with me, wherever I was in my progress of my project. She was there willing to listen and kind of give me ideas, questions to think about. And we'd always have some, a little bit of chat too, that's more just, personal, and talking about, as a parent, how do we get through the school year, taking care of our kids and doing this project. So I felt super supported, and I wouldn't have expected that from a quantitative mentor. I don't know why, but they're people too.
Zach, I know I'm putting you on blast because Laura's your mentor, so but feel free to say mean things if you want.
So I've been super blessed to have Dr. Laura Stapleton as my mentor, and it's helpful because she's like the person in the area that I want to work in, which is complex sampling and working with secondary data. And so it's nice to we have monthly meetings, and I set goals and then I try to meet them, sometimes a new season of Great British Bake Off will come on, and then we need to check in on the season and how it's going. But it's been super helpful because also I'm able to ask questions to kind of like this like hidden curriculum that I don't know about academia. I don't know about different institutions. I'm more at a teaching focused institution. And so asking her about the lay of the land in academia has been very helpful. But also having those meetings when I can come to her and ask these questions and not feel like an idiot has been super helpful. But also the knowledge, like I have an expert that I can send and know that I'm getting really good information that I wish I knew during my dissertation. I've learned a lot this year that like, ooh, I made some maybe errors on my dissertation, but we won't talk about that and I'll fix them in the future.
That's great. So I think we have time for one more question for all of you. And I wanted to ask you, we've heard a bit more from the quantitative side, what team science is like, but I wanted to hear from you all if you've engaged in collaborative or team science research and what that has been like for you on the STEM education side, since that's where our program is trying to reach.
Yeah, so I guess I didn't mention this in my introduction, my background is in biology, bench science, and I transitioned to a discipline-based education research lab for my postdoc. And so all methods, both quant and qual, were new to me. I joined a project with my postdoc advisor was collaborating with physics education researchers and chemistry education researchers from different institutions. And so we were doing meetings on Zoom before meetings on Zoom were part of every day. And yeah, I think one thing that I really appreciated about joining that project was kind of seeing how they structured their collaborations. Each group, the understanding was that each group was going to be leading a different project under this greater NSF funded umbrella project. And so each group would be taking lead on something, other people would be providing support, everyone would be co-authors. Roles were pretty clear early on. And then in terms of collaboration, yeah, Zoom was great for co-working. We did a lot of qualitative analysis, just going back and forth, watching videos, doing our coding together. Lots of, yeah, I remember having Zoom fatigue before Zoom fatigue was like every day. But yeah, I think it was a really good experience just for kind of introducing me to how collaborative projects could work. I had one collaborative project during my PhD, but it was not quite as like, with education research just requires so much going back and forth of the data. And that was something that was new to me.
Thanks, Claire. Seema?
I would say that I think before COVID, I was always, I think, collaborating with faculty or, people from different universities. And so I was kind of already used to doing those Zoom meetings. But after this, I guess there's like some level of knowledge of learning how to do this in an organized, manner, like Claire was talking about, like having a homework assignment before coming back to our next meeting. So we are staying on top of our work. But I just wanted to mention also even within the program, just having relationships with other scholars in the program has been really helpful. There were a couple of scholars in my group, but then also in other groups that we've met just, separately on Zoom meetings to talk about either work, to talk about how we're getting through the program, or just to talk about ideas. And some of it, we were at different levels in terms of understanding quantitative research. But it was nice to be able to talk to, a colleague about it, which I don't always have available here. So the program was really great with that.
Thanks, Seema. And we didn't pay her to say that. Zach, did you have something you wanted to say? I don't want to put you on blast if you didn't.
No, yeah. So I think Seema touched on a really good part. I'm also working with someone kind of on Laura's team, and we're working on projects. And I feel like this, just talking with Laura and talking with the whole team, I know how to do team science better. Like, I think I maybe knew how to, but now I feel more confident. And so now I'm able to, we did a whole meet the methodologist thing, and now I feel in a better place to be like, oh, that's what you just have to say to them? Great. So now I'm working on a project with people from all over the United States, and this one methodologist is working on this one section that we need, and another one's working on something else, and I'm able to lead it. And I think that's because of this program and answering some of those questions that I had about. Now, as Laura mentioned, that I know the methods, may not be able to do them yet, but I know them enough that then I know who to find to help me answer this question. And so that's been very helpful. And I think it's going to put my career on a better trajectory because of it.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it. I think we'll be having some of our scholars in the next phase for the informal Q&A on the Zoom meeting. So if you have other questions for them, please bring them and they can answer some questions about their experiences in the program. And I think now I'm supposed to hand it back to Dr. Griffin, and she will share our last slide. Is that accurate? Maybe, or maybe I can share.
That is accurate. I'm just trying to get the right slide.
And at this point, there's of course some large truck outside my house making noise, so I apologize. But this sums up our formal presentation here, and I want to thank Greg and Kimberly and our panelists and Tessa and E and Francis back there. I know that they haven't shown their face, but they've answered some questions. So we're going to pitch it back to George here to tell us what's next.
Okay, great, great. Thank you all so much today. So this has been a great presentation. I feel like I have learned so much more about team science and mentoring. Thank you again for taking the time to share with us today. And I'm going to sort of speak for the faculty here. I'm sure if anyone has any questions, they can always reach you directly, email into you directly, or using other forms to contact you and to learn more about your work. But what we're gonna do is take a few minutes of a break, and at 3 o'clock Eastern time, we want to come back together and have an informal conversation. And I have put into the chat for everyone the link to a Zoom meeting where you'll all be able to turn on your cameras, turn on your microphones, and those who want can join us for a conversation. We'll have somewhat of a moderated informal discussion at that point. So that is in the chat, and I'll make sure it's in there again, and everyone will join us again at 3 for our informal discussion. I even think if I can do this correctly, I may be able to even share my screen to show you the link too. So for our informal discussion at 3. But again, join me in giving our faculty, and as well as others who have joined this course today, a round of applause. I think of myself as I could even figure out how to clap on Zoom, I would right now. But again, thank you all, and we will see you soon in our informal discussion.